Hello and welcome to part 5 of the Little Turtle series here on Blender Cookie. This is David Ward, and when last I left you, we had just finished creating all of the texture maps and everything for our little guy and his eyeballs and all that kind of stuff. Now, this part number 5 is going to be a little bit shorter because we're going to jump into cycles and set all our textures up there, but that shouldn't take too long. But we'll do that and then probably call it a day on part 5, and then part 6 we'll get in and put in some rigging stuff on the little guy. So all that being said, we got all our textures all done, so let's go ahead and jump into the cycles render. Come in there, and before we go any further, let's go ahead and kind of get the scene set up a little bit. We don't really need the light now because we're not going to be using a lamp. We're going to be using an emitter object, or emitter material, I guess, on an object to act as a light source. So let's go ahead and just, I would say we could delete this, but you know, sometimes you might want to go back and forth with the actual Blender internal render and kind of get, you know, whatever looks the best. But anyways, we're going to work with cycles. So we're going to move this lamp. We're just going to shoot it down to that bottom layer there. It's all there by itself. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn on this layer right here. And that's where we're going to put our new light sources. So we're going to Shift A, and I'm just going to add a plane, and then just rotate it around. I'll tell you what, let me turn my screencast keys on there. Okay. And tell you what, let's make this window a little bigger. So rotate that around, and we'll just drag it over here. And I'm still rotating around the 3D cursor, so let me go Control, comma, and that'll be around the center again. So we'll put this over here and kind of give the setup like, you know, if you ever you know, had school pictures, you know, at your school for your yearbook or whatever. They had basically a 3-point light setup where you have a bright light right here, and then you'll have a smaller light over here. Well, I guess they're sized. They're about the same size, but this one's brighter and this one's a little bit dimmer. So we'll put that over there, and then they have a light back here. Now, just real quick, this is called the 3-point light setup. You got your key light, which is the main light, the key, and then the fill light, which kind of fills in the dark shadows on the other side from the other angle from the key light, and then you have the backlight that kind of helps separate your character from the background. So let's get our backlight angled up a little bit higher, maybe a little bigger, just so it's not in the camera view. Let me look through the camera. I tell you what, let's grab the camera and kind of move down here so we get a nice shot of the little turtle guy there. And you can see that the key light right here is right there in the corner of the scene. So let's come to our top view and just kind of move that out of the way over here. Maybe move it up a little bit. Okay. Okay, so now let's add an endless ground plane, as it's called, with Shift A, and it's going to be a plane also. Go to our side view, and let's tab into edit mode and W subdivide. I'm going to come down here to the subdivide options, and let's give it 4 cuts, and then, well, I'll tell you what, let's make it 5 cuts, and then we're going to go to our side view and just kind of start bending up the back area there, like so. So it's a nice gradual transition from the flat surface curving up to the other flat surface, like so. Okay, so now let's tab out into object mode and move it down to where it's below his feet. And then we'll tab back in edit mode, select everything by hitting A, and then scale up. And just make it really big. And we'll go ahead and drag it up to where it's right there on the ground plane still. So maybe a little bit bigger. And zoom in real close. We don't want to go through his feet, just have him sitting right there on top of it, about like that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and tell it to have smooth shading over here, right there. And we'll go ahead and put on a subdivision surface modifier. So if we look through our camera now, you can see generally it's pretty good setup, but our endless plane, you can see the corner of it there. So I'll tell you what, let's go to our top view, and let's rotate it until it's kind of parallel with the camera, or kind of, you know, perpendicular to the camera, so it's facing directly to it. I'm proud of myself for remembering those math terms. It's been so long since I had math class. Perpendicular and parallel. Yay me. Anyways, so we got our scene pretty well set up. Let's go ahead and add the emission materials to our lamps, or to our light sources here. And the way we do that is just grab that and go over to our materials tab, click on that. I'm just going to say a new material, and let's just go ahead and call this box light. Okay, and the surface is going to be an emission right there, and change the color. Right now it's not quite all the way white, it's a little bit gray, so just grab that slider, drag it all the way up. So your RGB here is 1, 1, and 1, and then alpha also will be 1. But the strength, let's set that up to, let's make it 5. Okay, and then we'll grab the other lamps and go ahead and give them the box light material also. Okay, so now if we look through our camera, and you could hit F12 to render. Let me go ahead and change some render settings here. When I render, I like to render to a new window rather than occupy one of the windows I'm working in. So change the image editor, or the display right there, change that to new window. And now when I hit F12, it'll pop open a new window, and it'll go ahead and start rendering that. So that's one way you can test out how your lights and everything are set up, and that's pretty good. It looks a little dark. We might adjust some of those lights after we get the rest of the material set up, but for now, it's not looking too bad. So let's go ahead and escape out. And like I said, that's one way you can... wow, my mouse must have been... the mouse I have is kind of cheap. I need to get a different one. It does the buttons. Anyways, as I was saying, that's one way you can kind of see what it's looking like. Or you can go down here to your preview area here, and you can change it from solid, which is the kind of the gray clay view that we're seeing now, and you can change it to rendered. So it kind of gives you a on the fly, dynamic look at your scene as you're working in it, and you can even rotate around in here, and you don't have to be looking through the camera. But it kind of eats a lot of resources, especially the more complex your scene gets. So I like to stay in solid mode as much as possible, unless I really need to go into the rendered mode. So first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and work on the eyeballs. So we're going to go to the materials here, and since we have all of these saved in part 4, I'm going to go ahead and delete them now. So if we need them again, we can always go into the part 4 file and retrieve them. But for now, we're just going to have the eyeball texture and the lens. So let's change this window over here to Node Editor, and go ahead and hit N to get rid of the Properties panel there. And we'll just zoom into his eyes right here. Okay, so now to change the regular internal, the Blender internal materials to cycles materials, you can just work from what you got here. Like right now we have eyeball texture, so just go ahead and click on Use Nodes, and that'll initiate the cycles settings. So what we want right now for the eyeball itself is diffuse BSDF, and that's set by default, so that's good. But now we need to tell it needs to have a texture map, so we're going to add a shader, or actually it's going to be a texture, and it's going to be image texture. There we go. And just drag that over there, and we'll go ahead and add an input, and it's going to be texture coordinates right there. Drag that over here, and connect the UV down to the vector right there, and that kind of tells it how to map it on the object. It's kind of UV is kind of the default, but it's good practice to go ahead and link that up like so. And then we'll go ahead and set the image texture color to the color of the diffuse BSDF, and then that goes out to the material output surface. Okay, so we need to go ahead and tell it which image texture to use. So we can probably click on the little thumbnail there, and yes, we have eyeball texture map loaded into our Blender scene already. So there we go. So we're pretty well done with that eyeball texture now, but we wouldn't be able to see it if we were to render, because the lens setting also needs to be set up. So we're going to go ahead and use nodes on this one as well, but on this time, instead of using diffuse BSDF, we're going to click on this and go down to glass BSDF. Now, if you wanted to make a glass vase or something like that, vase, you could change the color of it right here, but and then change the roughness and some of these settings and make it more visible. But since we want the lens to be pretty well transparent, we'll just leave it white. And it kind of adds glossiness and all the reflecting and all that stuff that it needs to, simply because we chose glass BSDF. So now, since we changed those on this eyeball, we can go ahead and get rid of those materials as well that we deleted on the other one. But since we changed the eyeball texture and the lens materials across the board, those are, copied over, basically. So now if we go to our rendered settings, you'll be able to see how the eyeballs are going to look. It looks pretty good. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to solid view. And for now, let's just go ahead and grab those eyeballs and hide them, just so it's a little easier once we get in to making the materials here and testing it out. It doesn't have to calculate all the reflections and everything there in the lenses. So I'm just going to work on the turtle's body for now. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the shell and hide it, just like I did with the eyeballs. Just grab it and hit H. And we'll grab the model here. And right now he's just got material as his material. So let's go ahead and name this turtle skin. Okay. And we'll go ahead and use nodes. Diffuse BSDF is the correct one. This one's going to be a little more complicated than the eyeball, but we'll have a few of the same things. We'll need to add the texture, image texture. Move that over here, and then also the texture coordinates right there. And we'll drag the UV down to the vector, and go ahead and just set this up like we did on the eyeball. Go ahead and choose the, I think it's going to be Untitled right there. So we'll go ahead and test that out here under rendered. And it's not showing it, so because I did that to normal instead. It needs to go to color. There we go. So that's mapped out nicely on there. And tell you what, you can test the simple texture out. You don't have to go into rendered mode. You can just go to material mode and it'll show it there. However, now I'm going to test out the normal maps that we created in part 4, or was it part 3? But it's very similar. To the same thing. We just grab this image texture, go ahead and Control D or Shift D and duplicate it, and then we'll change the thumbnail. We'll click on the thumbnail to change the image, and it's going to be those thumbnails are really small. I can't tell. I don't think it's loaded in the scene. So let's just open it up. We'll open up that and go to our thumbnail view, and it's going to be normal map from part 3. So we'll go ahead and open that. And then we need to add a couple of things in here so that it knows this is a normal map. We're going to add a vector, and it's going to be normal map right there. And default is tangent space, and that's correct. So we need to drag color down to color there. Link that up. If I can do it correctly there. There we go. And then go ahead and drag the UV down here to vector there. And then now we're going to go from the normal map right here up to the normal place there on the diffuse BSDF. Now you might be noticing nothing's really happening here. That's because we need to tell this image texture here, zoom in here, instead of color, it needs to say non-color data. So we click that, and you can kind of see it start working in here, but it's very, very subtle. So let's change the strength of it. Let's pump that up to 3. See what it looks like then. And now you can kind of see those scaly things we put around his mouth and eyes and everything. We could make that a little higher if you wanted, maybe 5. Okay, so that's a lot more visible now. Zoom in here and see it. Oops. Let it clear up a second. Okay, so that's that, but now we need to add that bump map that we created. So this one's going to be same thing. Grab the image texture, Shift D to duplicate it, or you can always just add a new image texture like that, but this way is a little bit faster. So go ahead and click on the little thumbnail. I think this one should still be in here. Skin bump right there, yes. And again, from the UVs down to the vector. And we'll drag this down just so we can get it lined up a little easier. But now we're going to add an output or let's see, it's color. I'm sorry, I was doing this earlier. RGB to black and white. So we'll grab that, drag that over there, and then we'll drag this directly up to the displacement tab there. And you'll be able to see that bump map that we that we added. But it's a little coarse. It's a little too much right now. So let's add one more thing here. We're going to add a color mix, and we're going to put this right in here. So we're mixing the bump map with just a shade of white here. And then that'll help kind of smooth it out. So right now it's a factor of 0.5, which is kind of a 50-50. It's kind of cutting the bump map in half, which is, it's almost right, but I'd like to see it a little less. So let's try, I think if we go higher, it'll make the white color higher across the board. Yeah. So it's a little more subtle. So we got the bump map kind of more subtly on there. And then we also have the tangent normal map right there. And it's looking pretty good, but I'd kind of like to give him a little bit of a glossy skin texture. So it kind of looks a little bit wet. So let's try that. So now we're going to add another input, or actually another shader. And this one's going to be glossy BSDF instead of the diffuse like earlier. Let me go ahead and delete those. Drag that on there by accident. So I just held down Control and left click and drag, and it kind of turns it into a knife, and you can just cut the noodles, as it were. Okay, so we're basically going to have all the same settings here on the glossy that we have on the diffuse. So we're going to just, on the image texture here, just going to copy that up to the color. And then the same thing on the normal map, just going to go ahead and copy that up to normal there. And now we're going to add a mix shader right there. Drag that up here. Drag that down to there. Drag this one here. And go ahead and come over here and go ahead and drag that mix shader to replace the original, and go ahead and cut that noodle out. And now you can see that we have a little bit glossier, and it's still got all the bumps and everything, but it's obviously a little too glossy now. So I'm going to go ahead and put this, let's try, I'm thinking if I go down it's going to get more shiny. Yes, so we'll go up to, let's try 0.75. Just a very, very subtle gloss. Maybe even higher, maybe 0.8. And then we can change the roughness here of the glossy, so it's not quite as specular, if that makes sense. It's not as, the shine is more dispersed. So if we set the roughness to, say, let's try 0.5. Okay, it's dispersed quite a bit, so let's set the factor here at about 0.5. And it might be a little bit too much all around. So let's try 0.35 right there, and then maybe make this about 0.35 as well. Okay, so he's a little more glossy. It's I don't really like that. It looks more metallic than anything. But you can play with the settings here. What was the original? 0.2, and then we'll make this one 0.75. So you can play with the settings there to kind of get it to the glossiness that you like. And there we have our turtle and his skin texture and everything. Pretty well set. Now, let's unhide the objects that we hid before. So just Alt-H, and it'll pop them in there. And you can grab the shell, and you can see that it has the same texture map that the skin has, turtle skin. So let's just go ahead and copy that. It'll be a little bit faster. So we'll just hit that number right there, number 2. And we'll make a copy, and we'll just call this one turtle shell. Now the only things that we have to change are the image maps. So we'll come over here, and rather than try to find them here in the thumbnails, I'll just go ahead and open them up. And this is going to be, go to our thumbnail view, this is going to be the shell. So we'll go and open that. Okay, and then we'll come down here, and this is going to be the tangent normal map for the shell. So we'll go and open that one up. Thumbnail view, right there. Okay, and then finally the bump map. So we'll go ahead and open this up, thumbnail view again, and this one here. Open that, And now our turtle shell should be pretty well set up, just like the skin. Now, if you wanted to make it a little bit shinier, you know, to kind of have a different texture look than the actual skin, you could play with that. But in any case, that's pretty well it on the textures. So yeah, it's pretty easy once you figure out how to do it. So hopefully I didn't go over that too fast. Let me just kind of run it down again. Basically, we have the texture coordinates telling it that we're coming from the UV coordinates that we mapped out, and that's going to control the image texture, which is going to mix a non-shininess with a shininess together to go out to the final surface. And then also the UV coordinates controlling the tangent normal map that we created, that we have to define as a normal map that goes to the normal map settings on each one of the diffuse and glossy, so on and so forth. And then the image texture, it doesn't need a shader because it's a displacement map rather than a surface map. So anyways, hopefully that's understandable. So all that being said, let's go ahead and just do a test render here. And I'll tell you what, let me go ahead and escape that out. And I can see just from the preview here that I would like the lamps to be a little bit more bright, a little bit brighter. So I'm going to grab this lamp and I'm just going to make it bigger. And we'll make this one a little bit bigger as well. And the bigger they are, the more light they emit. So you could also change the number here, which I guess we can kind of do both. Make them a little bit bigger and then maybe make this 7. Or, you know what, let's just go 10. Let's see what it looks like with 10. Look through our camera. And let's go rendered material, or rendered shading there. Shading. And I guess that looks okay. Maybe a little bright, but you get the idea. So that's how you use a simple way to do materials and cycles. It's not as daunting as it might seem at first glance, but anyway, so that's our little turtle rendered in cycles. I guess we can set the samples up a little bit to get a bit less grainy. So I'll tell you what, I'll do that. I'll set the render samples up to let's say 60, and I'll go ahead and hit render, and I'll pause recording. Pop that up there. And I'll pause recording, and I'll come back when that's done rendering. So we'll be right back. Okay, and here he is all rendered out with the higher samples. As you can see, it's not quite as grainy. Still got a little bit of grain in there. You can set the sample size as high as you like. I don't like to make it too high because I don't have a lot of patience when it comes to rendering. I feel if it takes longer than a minute, it's taken too long, but that's just my opinion, especially when it's just a simple character like this. I personally kind of prefer the Blender internal, but as they've said, they're kind of phasing it out. They're not doing any more production on it or development, so gotta get with the times and kind of learn the new stuff. But anyways, one more thing before we go. I'm noticing with the render that the tangent normals look a little bit too visible. I'd like them to be quite a bit more subtle. So let's just go ahead and grab our skin here and go down to our normal and set. Remember, we set the strength to 5. Let's go ahead and make that 3 again. And let me see what that looked like again on the shell. I think on the shell it looks okay because the shell's more rough, but the skin is a little bit softer, or quite a bit softer. So we'll set that lower. And let me go ahead and save this, actually. Be a bad thing for my computer to crash about then right before I save. But anyways, let me go ahead and do one more render just so you can see what that looks like with 3 instead of 5. So we'll go ahead and render the scene again. And once again, I will pause until that's done, and I'll be right back. And there he is. It's, in my opinion, still a little bit strong, but I'll leave it. I'll leave it alone. You get the idea. So anyways, that's going to be it for part 5. I honestly would like to be able to put a subsurface scattering of some sort on there, and I know there's ways you can fake it in cycles, but I'd rather just wait until they actually get it implemented and there's a node for it. But anyways, there you go. So that's going to be it for the cycles, and like I said, in part 6 we'll get into getting them rigged up with a fairly simple rig. No need to get crazy with it. And then maybe some shape keys for the face and some facial expressions. So, again, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in part 6.